Hey everyone, welcome to week 54. This is day 3. This is Wednesday. This is our ongoing water mixable oil paint week. And we're trying to see if I can get a feel of how these water mixable oil paints compare to traditional oil paints. And so far, I'm liking them. I don't know if I can replace totally my oil paints, but I think I'm getting, good vibes from them. So we'll see how we do today.
Okay, let's get started. This is going to be day 3. This is our week of water mixable oils. And just as a reminder, this is the first time I've ever tried these paints. This is not like me going back to acrylic paint, let's say, because if it were acrylic paint, if this week was about, me going back to acrylic paint, even though I've done, only a handful of paintings in acrylic, I kind of know what to expect when I paint with acrylic. I can understand how I need to go about it, and I can understand how I need to respect the drying times of acrylic. And I think I would be able to adjust, and they feel different enough from oil paints that I know that I would immediately understand that, no, I'm not painting with oil paint. I'm painting with something that's totally different. And similar to what happens with gouache, even though, you can sense my resistance when I paint with gouache, I would try and understand the essence of painting with acrylic. And, it won't happen in a week, but I would try to make adjustments. I would try to make the necessary adjustments so that my painting can actually accommodate to that particular technique. Now, this week is a little bit strange because I can't say I'm going back to something. These are paints that I'm completely unfamiliar with, so I don't really know how they behave. I'm trying to get a feel for them as I'm painting, and that's not something that's easy. I've described a moment in my painting career where I was doing a demo and I was using a surface that was completely alien to me, and I thought that I would be able to handle it. And that experience proved me very, very wrong. And I realized that no, I'm not good enough. I was way overconfident back then. And it was one of those things that made me realize that even though I have the ability to recognize what I have to do, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. As with everything in art, most of the things in painting, adjustments take time. Learning takes time. Recognizing the wonderful things that are happening while you're painting takes time. Recognizing your shortcomings takes time. So even though those things can seem to be readily available to you, they're right there at the surface so you can extract all the knowledge that you need from them, it's not going to happen quickly. Quickly is not a thing that we can tie to the learning that comes from painting practice in particular. So I'm approaching this week not so much as I painted with, water mixable oil paints, like tick that box, I'm done. This is my conclusion. These are my results. I am going to be able to transition to these paints, period. No, not really. I think it's far more complicated than that. I think that what is going to happen is that a bunch of questions are going to be thrown my way, in the sense that I have to put in a balance all the things that I'm going to eventually find as beneficial for me and for my painting practice that are inherent to water mixable oil paints. And on the other side, I'm going to have to put my regular traditional oil paints, knowing that even though I have alternatives within traditional oil painting, my practice still, for example, uses a minimal amount of medium that does have solvent in it. And I do use paints that have pigments with heavy metals. I don't use lead white anymore, even though that's something that I really, really enjoyed in the past. I'm going to have to reflect, and I'm going to have to say, okay, which is more important? And am I willing to sacrifice certain things in order to transition to a painting technique that is obviously far less harmful than traditional oil painting? So that's going to be tough. Giving up those things, giving up the things that you grew up to love is very, very hard. And I think that right now I'm not ready to make that decision yet. I'm grateful that I'm finding every day that I work with these paints inherent qualities that I start to enjoy, but I also have this, feeling in the back of my throat. No, it's not solvent burning, but I have this little feeling, in my throat that's telling me, no, you want to say things through oil painting. You're yearning for oil painting. I particularly don't like that feeling. I've told you guys that in life, not only in painting, I try to not dwell upon the things that I don't have, and I just cherish the things that I do. Whatever those things are. If I can gift myself things that make me smile, for example, if I can gift myself the chance to cohabit with a bunch of paintings that wonderful and very talented artists do, and that's what we try to do with Danny. We try to constantly purchase paintings from talented young painters all over this world. If I can gift myself that chance to live among these paintings and these works of art that bring me joy, that's wonderful. Even if I couldn't do that, if my life was just this blank slate and I had nothing, I would still find joy in what painting would provide for me. So I always try to recognize what I'm capable of doing, the things that I do have, the moments that I can share, the experiences that I can cherish, and not compare myself to other painters and not think about the things that I can't have. So I am at times disappointed in myself when I recognize that I get frustrated because I want paint, in particular this water mixable oil paint, to behave like oil paint. So I'm like super mad. I'm like, why don't you behave like traditional oil paint? Like I get a little frustrated. And I very quickly try to teach myself that that's not the point. The point is not for this to become, a one-to-one replacement, because it's almost impossible. I don't think that that's what this is meant to do. I think it's meant to try and emulate that experience, but in the end, it's going to have its own little quirks, and we have to get used to them. So I'm trying to teach myself, again, not to see oil painting as casting this large shadow that is going to engulf, all the benefits that could come from water mixable paint. So even though this is my third day using these paints, I'm starting to recognize a few things. Now, remember, we have ground rules. We have a set of rules that we are going to maintain throughout the week. And if you guys know me, I always like to have constants during my week because they give me like a base of comparison. And it's almost like I can ground my experiences and I can know that even though I can produce different paintings throughout the week and they may have different intents and the subject matter may be quite different and the way I reflect upon that subject matter can take me to completely different journeys, I always want to have something that ties everything together, that links everything together. So it's very important for me to say that I am going to use raw paper for this week, and I am going to use water. Now, I'm not going to run into the trouble native to trying to paint an indirect painting, for example, and I would have to use this paint in a bunch of layers. I really don't know what the layering of this paint feels like. I could tell you one thing, though, and this is something that I'm kind of mad at myself because I'm noticing that it is actually making me become a somewhat impatient painter, which is, essentially not true. I am a very, very patient human being. I can take my time with anything. And for example, we've bought a ton of paintings with Danny from people all over the world. And many times they take 4 months, 5 months to get to us. A lot of times, sadly, those paintings have been lost on the way here. And that's a very sad thing. That's the nature of mailing overseas, I guess, during a pandemic. But regardless, it's almost like I feel like I'm on the 16th century just trying to send a letter to somebody. Which, by the way, that must have been an amazing thing, like the understanding of present. Because when you get that letter, let's think that we are in the late 18th century then. So your letter is going to cross the Atlantic. So amazing how when a person would read that letter, it would be 6-8 months to get to somebody, I'm guessing. I mean, if right now when somebody sends us a painting from the UK, it takes us about 4 or 5 months to get it here, I'm guessing that 200-300 years ago, it might have taken 6 to 8 months. But when you're reading something, you imagine a present. When you read that letter, you're thinking that it was written immediately before you read it. So I don't know. That's amazing. Absurd tangent. It has nothing to do with water mixable oils, but my mind took me there. But anyways, so I'm gifted with patience, but with my traditional painting practice, let's call it that, I've been using for the past couple of years a fast drying white. I was using first the Michael Harding with dryers, and that's a very, very gummy, very tough titanium white to paint with, but it dries almost touch dry the next day. It's crazy. It's really crazy paint. I still don't know how super stable it is if you're trying to do indirect painting. I don't know if it flash dries and it keeps moving underneath. I'm not entirely sure how super stable it is, but I loved it. I loved that paint. The only reason that I started buying the M Graham titanium white that dries quickly was because I just couldn't find the titanium white number 3 from Michael Harding in the websites that I usually bought it from. That's the only reason. But regardless, the M Graham titanium white, I'm talking about oil paint, traditional oil paint now, dries also in about 2 days. In a couple of days, it's also touch dry. It handles very differently from the Michael Harding one. It's a little more creamy, a little more forgiving in a sense, I would say. And I've really liked it, even though I've minimized my use of mediums and solvent. But because I use that titanium white with dryers, or whatever they put in it to accelerate the drying times, and I'm also using liquid, which dries very, very quickly, almost overnight. Because of that, I've gotten almost used to paintings drying in 2, 3, 4 days tops. And these paints take a very long time to dry. I would even say they take longer than traditional oils to dry. I think I used the Michael Harding titanium white ground in linseed oil. It's glorious. It's absolutely glorious. It's like buttery, smooth. It behaves like titanium white, but just the handling and the creaminess is just, it's delicious. I remember using that, and I know perfectly how long it can take for titanium white to stabilize and to dry. So I know that takes a long time. But this paint, for some reason, feels different. It just feels different, and it feels different as it's drying. I'm not quite sure how much this paint is transforming while it's drying. Remember, we're not talking about the part of that paint that has to do with the pigment and the linseed oil. We're talking about that modified oil. I don't know how that behaves. I don't really know if it transforms or not. I could actually try and write to Winsor Newton. I'm sure that at some point it's like they have their special formula and they just don't want to share, what they use to make that paint. But I think that they would be kind enough to try and provide us with some answers as to what exactly is that they're doing with that modified oil and if it's actually transforming while it's oxidizing. For example, I don't know if you can lift paint, once it's dry with water. I haven't read a lot about that. If you guys know about this, you can leave a comment below. But I don't know if you can, as you can do with turpentine, you could take, for example, the Titian painting that is over 500 years old, and you could just rub turpentine on that canvas, and you would lift every bit of paint that's on that canvas. You can actually dilute that paint. I don't know if water can dilute this water mixable oil paint once it has dried, or if there's a transformation process, not unlike acrylics, although I'm pretty sure it's not quite like acrylics, but where you can't really rub water on top of, dried acrylic paint with the hopes of actually diluting it. That's not going to happen because acrylic paint actually transforms when it oxidizes. So I don't know what's happening to that paint. What I do know is that it's becoming very matte. You can see that it's a bit more dead than the moment where you put it down. I was able to, fortunately, with Tsiebis painting on Monday, to put some retouch varnish on top of that painting. I mean, I think the painting was touch dry, and I was willing to risk it. I was willing to say, I don't know if this is dry enough. I think we've all been there when we think our painting is dry. Maybe we're rushing for a show. Maybe we sold the painting and the person is expecting the painting like the next day. But we've all charged that brush with a bunch of, be it final varnish or retouch varnish or liquid or whatever you want to put on a paint layer to rework it or to make it glossy again. And when that paint starts lifting, oh my God, we feel terrible. We feel so dumb. So I was having that existential dread of, passing the brush on top of the painting and seeing that painting just lift off. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. You know what is kind of weird about this painting? It has like this tackiness that it almost levels at. It just feels kind of tacky to the touch. Instead of feeling like it oxidized and it's stabilized and it can harden, it can create a skin, like an outer skin. It just seems tacky all the time. For example, Siebe's painting, I ended up putting some retouch varnish 8 days after I painted the painting. So this is a week's drying time, which is pretty okay, I would say. Again, I'm spoiled. I've gotten used to paint drying super, super quickly. So I should just kind of remember what paint used to behave like when I was painting more traditionally. But I have to say, yeah, that's a weird part of that paint. I can deal with the handling not being quite the same thing. I can deal with that initial wash of water like I did yesterday. I thought it was very, very nice. The way in which these washes are kind of reminiscent to watercolor almost, especially because I'm working in this watercolor paper. But I really like the way those washes feel. A turpentine wash always feels greasy in a way. And that's just the nature of that solvent. I mean, nicer turpentine, you don't get that super greasy feel. But still, that's the way it is. But when using water, you get that kind of feeling of how the paint spreads with water. And it's very, very nice. Like yesterday, I tried to find the balance between that initial wash, and I kind of left some moments of that initial stage, and I built up my paint in Danny's portrait. So, I liked having those two very different possibilities when using this paint be available to me while I'm working. And I tried to evidence those yesterday. I kind of did the same thing today with the bottom part of Greg's portrait. Greg Harris, by the way, a really, really cool young artist. And he was kind enough to let me paint him. And I really, really enjoyed this portrait of Greg. He usually works with like really saturated colors, very, very expressive. And I really liked that when I painted Greg, I kind of imposed all this grayness and all my mucky atmosphere to the depiction of him. So it was really nice. But, in today's painting of Greg, it's the same thing. I was trying to do a little bit of that wash and then build up the paint throughout the portrait. And again, I can kind of get used to those things. I can start recognizing the possibilities that are there. I'm even completely fine because it is a trait of this cheaper paint. Perhaps other brands behave a little bit differently, but because this paint is actually grayer, it's closer to what I natively like about painting. So I'm totally fine with it being a little more unsaturated, with the contrast not being as high as I would want. I'm completely fine with that. I can totally enjoy those things. That's the way I naturally want to paint. So I would never consider those things as being hindrances. But the drying time, and I'm probably just being picky here, and this surely shouldn't be a problem if you just have enough time. But drying times, I don't know. I can't imagine if I was painting a multi-layered painting and if I would have to wait for that paint layer to dry. It would just drive me nuts. By the way, that's why when we're painting larger or paintings that we know we're going to have to resolve in a bunch of different layers, we should always be working on many paintings at the same time. That's the only way we can be proficient at painting and we don't obsess over a single painting, which is not really cool. We should have other venues, within painting where we can vent, where we can say, I need to take a break, not from painting because ultimately that's our job. And, if we love painting, that's what we want to do. We want to be painting all the time, but we just want to have a different experience. We want to exhale and just have this painting that is challenging us in a very different way. The tough thing about working with many paintings at the same time is that you have to shift gears constantly and you're always going to have to adjust. The intent behind the paintings can be completely different. So you're going to have to train yourself to say, I have to be on my toes to be constantly able to remind myself, what was it that I was painting? The most terrible thing that you can do when you get back to a painting is forget what was it that you liked about that painting. Why did I find this so moving in the first place? Now it just looks labored and I don't even remember what I fell in love with when I started painting this. We never want to get to that point. All this reflection stems from the fact that, as a paint layer, I don't know. I'm not finding it as attractive and obviously as efficient as the practice that I was able to land on and that I've been working with, for the past couple of years. I know what to expect from my painting when I want it to dry super, super quickly. So, that's the only thing that's bothering me at the moment. But we have 2 more days and we can keep exploring this. I do feel, and you guys have suggested this, but I do feel that I have to go back to this paint with a traditionally prepared ground. I need to prime my surface properly, so I think I'm willing to put some gesso on top of some canvas that I have laying around and just give these a shot again and see how they behave, see what happens when my surface is not really absorbing the majority of the binder that's in that paint. Maybe because the paper is sucking in so much of that oil and that modified oil, I'm separating the paint a little too much. And what I'm left with is this pasty pigment on top of the painting that doesn't have enough binder in it to help it dry in a more stable manner. If I can think of one thing that is probably not helping my painting dry, it would be that. So I would be interested in making some more exercises to see if the drying times can be a little bit better if I paint on a layer that's far less absorbent. But let me know, you guys tell me if you'd be interested in us revisiting in the future these paints and trying to see them under a different light. Maybe we can order some weird water miscible medium and see how that behaves also. So let me know. But that's going to be it for today. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Remember, we have 2 more days where we're going to try to get a little more intimate, a little bit closer to the inherent qualities that are behind water mixable oil paint. So thank you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.